Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network's Heritage Talks online program. My name is Heather Darch, and I'm here with Glenn Patterson, and we are project directors for the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network, otherwise known as QAN. Thank you very much for joining Heritage Talks online today, and welcome to our series called Dreaming Big, Inspiring Stories from Across Quebec's Heritage Community. If this is the first time that you're joining us, Heritage Talks Online is a free speaker series presented by QAN. We have invited organizations from across Quebec's heritage and cultural communities to tell us their inspiring stories. And it's exciting to hear from the historical societies, museums, community organizations, and cultural groups whose vision has been powerful and has had a lasting impact on the history and heritage of Quebec. QAN is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to preserve and promote the history and heritage of Quebec, and in particular of Quebec's English-speaking communities and people spread right across the province. You're welcome to become a member of QAN, and membership is open to everyone, including community groups and heritage organizations. So please check our website at qahn.org for more information about becoming a part of the network. Membership gives you access to interesting workshops and programs and projects, to special publications, and information about the work going on in the community groups and organizations. And it also gives you access to our quarterly publication called Quebec Heritage News. This is a great publication that tells us the history and heritage of communities that you may not have heard about before, and stories that you won't find in history textbooks. So if you really like a good read, diving into the past about maybe some history that will be illuminating for you, I encourage you to become a member, get your own copy of Quebec Heritage News, and more importantly, become part of our really great and dynamic network spread across the province. For first-time new members, you can take advantage of a 30% discount today. That's $20 for a one-year membership. All you have to do is claim the discount within the time frame of this broadcast. And you can send us a note if you're on Zoom in the chat box that you're interested, or send us a note on Facebook and we'll direct you as to how to become a member. I would like to thank the funders who make this program possible, including Canadian Heritage, the Chalkers Foundation, the Zeller Family Foundation, and the Townshippers Foundation. Thank you very much. All of our presentations are recorded. So if you've missed presentations from the past, including our series from last year, you can go to our Heritage Talks Facebook page, and you don't need a Facebook page of your own. It's a public site. And you can go there now and you can see the lineup of all the presentations still to come in our 2022 series. Before we proceed, I'll turn it over to my colleague Glenn for a few technical instructions for everybody who's out there watching today. Hi, Glenn.
Hi, Heather. Welcome, everyone. I'm here helping out with tech. So the most important thing is, if you're having any issues, if you're here on Zoom with us, use the chat box. You can find that down on the bottom of the Zoom window. If you're on a mobile device like an iPhone or whatever, you may have to tap the screen once, and then you'll see a menu pop up where you can access the chat box. So just let us know if you're having any issues, and we'll do what we can to help you out. I want to say, as Heather mentioned, this is being recorded. And it's also being broadcast at the same time on our Facebook page. So if you're not okay with that, if you're uncomfortable with that, you're welcome to leave the Zoom call and you can just watch us on Facebook. It's the same program, it's live, so you won't miss anything. The other thing is, in the Q&A, I'll talk to you again about the microphones, but if you've tried to unmute yourself, you probably found out that you're not able to, which is intentional. So I'll leave it there for now. But Heather, come back on and introduce our speakers.
Great, thanks, Glenn. Well, we were delighted when we invited our next speakers to make a presentation for Heritage Talks Online. Our speakers today are representing the Pettis Memorial Library. Jana Valasek has been the executive director of the Pettis Memorial Library since 2004. She did both her undergraduate and graduate degrees at McGill University. She holds a BA in history with a second major in Canadian studies, as well as a Master of Library and Information Studies. She lives in Sutton with her family and many, many animals. Anne-Marie Adams is an architectural historian specializing in the intersections of medicine, gender, and the built environment. She is the Stevenson Professor of the Department of Social Studies of Medicine and former director of the School of Architecture at McGill University. Her books include Architecture in the Family Way, Designing Women, and Medicine by Design. Their talk this afternoon is called The Heritage of the Pettis Memorial Library, Past, Present, and Future. Hello to you both, and welcome to Quan's Heritage Talks Online.
Hi there. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to try and get the screen share going, which is there. Can everybody see it? Good.
Looks good.
Okay, great. So good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I am Jana, and I'm the library director. And I will start out today talking about how this library came to be and about the woman who made it all happen. This is a photo of an old photo of the library. I don't have the exact date, but not too long after construction. Anne-Marie will then take over for a little bit, and she will speak about her research on our building, its architect and architecture. And so this is the building from way back, and here I have, did it not jump? Just a moment. Why is it not working, the slideshow?
You can use your left cursor.
Yeah, I know, I am. Well, this is a great start.
Do you want to try starting the screen share again? Sometimes.
Yeah, I'm going to stop the share, and maybe I shared the wrong thing. No, it's the slideshow. Maybe I'll do it this way. Maybe
Are you using this? Okay, let's try this.
Yeah. From beginning. Okay, let's see if it jumps. Okay, that's better. So this is a contemporary photo taken by one of our board members some years ago, someone who was very involved with our library as well. And I have lots of the images today will be from her. So after Anne-Marie talks about the architecture, I'll continue a bit about the library today, more its operations, how it's gone through the years, and then the very exciting plans for the future. So let's start with the history of the area. I've got a map here. The library is located in Knowlton, which is in the eastern townships of Quebec. And here you see where the townships are located in the province, just north of the border of what is now Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. The area located in what was then called Lower Canada was surveyed into townships under the British system and was opened for settlement. The first wave of settlers came at the very end of the 18th century from New England, many of them United Empire loyalists who had lost land after the American Revolution because they stayed loyal to Britain in that conflict. And they moved to these new lands that remained under British control. So they're down along this bottom area here. You can see the island of Montreal right there. Then I have a map of Brome Township. And this map dates from about 1881. Knowlton is marked here in blue, and it's a much bigger village on this map than it was in the decades preceding this at the beginning of settlement. The more important of these villages were Brome Corners down here in yellow, which is now known as Brome Village. And Brome was located then on the main stagecoach route that ran from Montreal to Boston. And so it was really the hub in the area. But you may recognize the names of some other villages in Brome Township, such as Fulford up here. In purple, there is Iron Hill, and then we have West Brome here. And the families I'll be talking about later who started this library, who built it, came from West Brome and Brome. And so Knowlton here was quite small. The first settlers showed up in the Knowlton area, I think, what is my next? Yeah, in the 1790s. So here we have Brome Lake. This is quite an old map. Knowlton is down here. So the little settlement went by the name of Cold Brook, named for the brook that runs through town, which runs somewhat this way and into Brome Lake. But when a post office was established there in 1851, the name was changed from Cold Brook to Knowlton after the man, Paul Holland Knowlton, who was instrumental in developing the town and the area around it. He had first established a farm on the eastern shore of Brome Lake, up in here somewhere, in 1815, but he was successful in many things, in farming, commerce, journalism, the militia, and politics. He set up a store, a distillery, and mills on Cold Brook, closer to where a new regional road was being built, and it was around this industrial center that Knowlton was built. Here you see the dam that he built on Cold Brook to create the mill pond. The Methodist Church here, so prominent, was opened in 1895. And so the library should already be built in these, at the time these photos were taken. It would be where you see the arrows pointing just off the, off of the images. If you notice the cleared hill behind the church, steeple in this first photo, that is known as East Hill. And that is where the second photo was taken from here. And you see the same church from the other side. The mill pond was much, much bigger, so it really wrapped around the church in a way. And the last thing I wanted to point out was that you see Brome Lake in the background. It's very faint, but this is Brome Lake, and this is Eagle Island that sits in the middle of the lake. There's so much history here, but let me just say that Knowlton grew in importance in the early years and became the county seat in 1855. Paul Holland Knowlton was the area's member of parliament for Lower Canada from 1830 to 1834. And to give some sense of the size, the population of Knowlton in 1900 was about 760, and grew to about 1,400 in the 1960s. So there was growth, but maybe not as huge as we would have thought in those years. Let me see. The first concept of a library happened early in Knowlton. In 1858, the Brome Literary Association was formed. And the lead player in this initiative was Joseph Marsh. So these are all the mid-1800s, 1850s, that suddenly the town is becoming more important, it's becoming the county seat, things are happening. And so this literary association was formed around then as well. And the lead player in it, who initiated it, was somebody named Joseph Marsh, and he had come up from the University of Vermont to take the post of principal at Knowlton Academy. And I've got a picture here. This was the building, actually built by Mr. Knowlton, whom I mentioned earlier. He built this building to house Knowlton Academy, and this is an old photo of it. And then this is a photo of it in the present day. So this Mr. Marsh, he came up from Vermont to be the principal of this Knowlton Academy in these buildings. And he organized the first meetings of the Literary Association shortly after he arrived. He came in May, and by December, they had formed this association of the same year. The second meeting, 2 weeks later, was one where they drew up a constitution, and they made the library, drew up the rules for the library. It was basically a lending library. Anybody could become a member. They could join. They'd have to pay to join a little bit. And it was open to anyone, and members could take out one book at a time for a period of a month, and there were fines if the books were returned late or damaged. So pretty much a library. Those first meetings of the association, as well as the library itself, the collection of books, were held at this Knowlton Academy of the time. The building is now one of the buildings in the museum complex run by the Brome County Historical Society, just up the road from us here. The Brome County Historical Society runs the museum and houses the historical records and archives related to Brome County, and it's well worth a visit. The association held its meetings shortly after here in the council room of the new courthouse, which was built in 1859. So, you know, the association was formed at the end of 1858, and this was built in 1859. And so the literary association moved into there. This building, an old picture and a contemporary one, are also is also a part of the museum compound here. So the association not only lent books, but it also organized a program of lectures on a variety of subjects. And there are many, but like an example is light literature or Canadian nationality, history, one was called moral discipline in schools, scientific agriculture, and such. The lecturers were mainly teachers and clergy. In 1861, when the association was at its peak, it passed a resolution to erect a building for public meetings and general purposes. However, there was a rather quick reversal from the enthusiasm to build a building and to have this association to the eventual dissolution of such. It happened that Joseph Marsh left Knowlton in 1862. And without his leadership, the association ceased operation the following year after only 5 years. So that is the end of that first library initiative in town. But one man, Jeremiah Pettis, who was very involved in it, later played an integral part in the establishment of the Pettis Memorial Library 30 years later. The building from which I am speaking today, well, Anne-Marie is here as well. We're both here today. His name was Jeremiah Pettes, and he was the brother of Nathaniel Pettes, who was married to Narcissa Farrand. And it was her, Narcissa Farrand Pettes, who had the library built in the memory of her late husband and daughter. So I'll give you some background on the Pettis and Farrand families. Sorry, this is a picture. It's a photo I took of a large photo we have framed up high on the wall, and I just couldn't get a good photo of it without a lot of reflection. So it's a little bit distorted, but you know, it's pretty much okay. This is a portrait of Nathaniel Pettes, and he was the son of Charles Pettis and Desiree West of West Brome. The Pettis family was of Scottish and English origin and emigrated to Massachusetts, where they were of good standing. Their property was confiscated during the American Revolution as they sided with Britain in the conflict, and the family came to Canada. Nathaniel, here pictured, owned a store and was in partnership with his brother Jeremiah. Nathaniel was business-minded and opened the hardware store and other businesses. Mr. Pettis was always intimately connected with the municipal and railway interests of Brome County and was recognized as one of its leading citizens. His brother Jeremiah was his partner in the store, but he was he had more of a poetic nature, having been a school teacher and instrumental in forming that Brome Literary Association I spoke of. After Nathaniel's death in October 1889, Jeremiah continued to own the store that they were partners in. And Jeremiah was also instrumental in the library project spearheaded by his sister-in-law, Narcissa. Now, the Farrand family, where Narcissa came from, this is a portrait of her as well here at the library. The Farrand family is believed to have Huguenot roots. The Huguenots were Protestant Calvinists who were prosecuted in France on a religious basis. And it is believed that a Daniel Farrand, with an E at the end, fled from France to England in 1560. So this goes way, way back. And that in 1645, his grandson, Nathaniel, emigrated to Milford, New England, where he was a landowner and prominent in local affairs down there. At some point, the Farrand family moved north, and it is simply known that Samuel Farrand, Samuel of Farrand, married Mary Platt, and their daughter Narcissa was born on December 8th, 1821, on a farm near the village of Brome. This is a slide. This is the obituary of Narcissa, and it's taken from the Sherbrooke Daily Record on, I don't remember the date, I have it elsewhere, but it's in 1912, November something, 1912. And this obituary is the document that for me gave the best picture of who she was, what she was like, and her legacy. And I would like to quote from it. I found it really enlightening. So, quote, her parents were possessors of rare intellectual endowments for those early pioneer days, and they gave their promising daughter all the advantages of that period. On the 25th of December, 1844, she married Nathaniel Pettes, and they lived in Brome until the early 60s. It's the 1860s, when they erected a beautiful home at Knowlton and moved there. So this home they built in Knowlton currently houses the Knowlton pub and is across the road here from the library. In January 1874, Nathaniel Pettes was elected by acclamation as a member of the county. And during the sessions of that parliament, she, Narcissa, always accompanied her husband to Ottawa and thoroughly enjoyed listening to the debates of that exciting period, the Mackenzie regime, from the Ladies' Gallery. She became quite a keen politician, and it was extremely interesting to her to hear her appreciation of some of our public men. She was always a great reader and had a most retentive memory. One of her great privations in her last years was her inability to keep up her reading. That's a picture of her. She's in the middle with the white cap at a quilting bee. I think this is after the library was built. And she was just always involved in the community. Her obituary continues. She was a cool, self-possessed woman and did not allow anything to deter her from doing what she felt to be her duty. She immediately set to work to see in what way she could perpetuate the memory of her husband and daughter, and at the same time benefit her fellow citizens. After a good deal of anxious thought, and after visiting several American towns, she settled upon a public library as being the best expression of what she desired to do. This beautiful building, which is one of Knowlton's chief charms, was opened to the public at a large gathering of the citizens on the 7th of March, 1894, as the Pettis Memorial. This will remain for a time a monument to Mrs. Pettis, Mrs. Pettis's thoughtfulness and generosity, and let us hope that it will be appreciated by those for whose benefit it was erected. Upon Nathaniel's death, and this is another portrait of her on the left, and her brother-in-law Jeremiah next to her, and they were the two who worked together to build the library. Upon Nathaniel's death, her husband's death in 1889, Narcissa was left with a considerable fortune, which made it possible for her to undertake the project of the public library in Knowlton. The land on which the library was built was purchased in May 1891 by Jeremiah Pettis, here pictured, for $1,500. He then sold this lot to his sister-in-law Narcissa on the same day for the same sum. Jeremiah continued to work closely with Narcissa on the plans for the library and its continued operation, and he was made president for life by Mrs. Pettis. The Pettis Memorial, I'll talk about the slide in a minute. The Pettis Memorial was incorporated by an act of parliament on January 6, 1894. The act to incorporate the Pettis Memorial was passed by the legislature in Quebec. This list here is the names of the first trustees in 1894. And again, we see important names from Knowlton's past that pop up over and over with important initiatives taken in the community. The incorporation was followed by a deed of donation given on March 7th, 1894, the same day as the opening of the library, of the building, where Narcissa Farrand gave the Pettis Memorial to the people of Knowlton and of Brome Township. As written in the deed of donation, the Pettis Memorial was described as follows. And I just made a slide of what I'm going to read because it really is the core of what this institution has been, and it's easier to follow if you can read it. Whereas the said donor is earnestly desirous to perpetuate for all time the name and memory of her late husband, the said Nathaniel Pettes, who, and for so many years, prominently associated with the public affairs of the said village of Knowlton and of the said township of Brome and county of Brome, and also in loving remembrance of her only child, Mary Louise Pettis, deceased now for many years, has determined that her wish in these respects can best be accomplished by devoting a portion of the means with which it had pleased God to bless the labors of her late husband and herself to the improvement and advancement intellectually and morally of her fellow citizens. And to that end, she has during the past year caused to be erected in the said village of Knowlton, a building known as the Pettis Memorial, which forever hereafter is destined for a free public library with the useful adjuncts of a reading and conversation room and of a lecture hall, to be open to all honest and respectable persons whomsoever of every rank and condition in life for the diffusion of useful knowledge. This generous gift to the community is commemorated by a marble tablet in the entrance hall. And that's the story of the early part. Now, Professor Adams will continue with details from her research. So I pass it to you, Anne-Marie.
Oh, thanks, Jana. And it's so great to be with all of you here today from this amazing library and to be speaking with Jana. We had a really good time putting this together. So I'll just go to the next slide, Jana. Thank you. So the architect of the Pettis Memorial is a fascinating character named George D. Story, who was then based in Newport, Vermont. And Story is particularly fascinating because he brought considerable experience in complex building design to the project. For example, he'd worked on the Pasadena, California Raymond Hotel, which shows on the left in 1884. And a more familiar building might be the one on the right, the Mansonville Methodist Church, which he designed from 1893 to 94. So it's likely that he was designing the Mansonville Church at the same time that he was designing our library. Next slide. Story will later do Stansted College Gym in 1905. And you just see the remaining cornerstone here on the right. It's interesting that 2 of these 3 buildings were eventually destroyed by fire. So this is the replacement gym for Story's gym on the left. Next slide, please. Another really important factor in the building's architectural history is that the so-called Knowlton Library functioned as so much more than a library. It was also a performance space and it was a memorial. So this postcard that I love, marked 1939, shows its urban context in the village at the main intersection and across from what we now call the Auberge, still operating today as a really popular hotel and restaurant. Next slide. So the library has real architectural style. And as an architectural historian, we would probably categorize it as Richardsonian Romanesque, which is a sub-style within all the various revivals of Victorian architecture. So to describe it, we would say it's a 2.5-story red brick block with a mansard roof and a central tower with roof cresting on the central tower. The building has prominent granite foundations and granite windowsills. It has triangular dormers in the mansard roof and 2 very prominent arched entrances. And the 2 entrances are subtly differentiated by materials in the voussoir arches. So one is brick and one is granite. And note that this arch motif of the elevation repeats on the 2nd floor. Called out with a really pronounced change in the brick pattern. There's also a very playful brick pattern just under the roof line. So more generally, like many Victorian public buildings, and I work on hospitals, so we see this all the time in hospitals, it has a clear front and back. The front, it fronts southward on Knowlton Road, and the east elevation, which you see in the photo on the right, has an extraordinary wooden balcony sitting atop a protruding bay window. And this 2-story protrusion also has a mansard roof, which steps eastward. Okay, next slide, please. So we really know a lot about the architectural materials from incredible documents that have been preserved in the Brome County Historical Society. The interior of it shows here. I was so delighted last summer to spend some time with these documents. The next slide. The detail with which Story outlined the project and acquired quotes on plumbing, wood, heating, and other finishes are really well documented. And in keeping with Mrs. Pettis's hope that the building would remain in good form for long after construction, Story really insisted on finishing the exterior in brick instead of wood. So the cost of the total building was about $7,000, which you see here detailed in this letter, and most of the money went to the really high quality brick. Next slide, please. So Story obtained numerous bids, maybe about a dozen, on the brick contract, and he took great care to outline exactly in what conditions the bricks were to arrive and be finished for the project. Next slide, please. So the Pettis, it's important to point out that the Pettis resembles a handful of other libraries in the Eastern Townships and in New England in really different ways. It may remind you of this building, the Haskell Library and Opera House in Stansted, in the fact that it's both a library and a performance space. And of course, this building's pretty famous because the US border runs right through the middle of the building. The next slide, please. But most importantly, it looks a lot like the Goodrich Memorial Library in Newport, Vermont, which is Story's professional base. And note that the Goodrich is 3 years after the Knowlton Library. So we could say that the Goodrich may have been inspired by the Pettis. Next slide, please. So the Goodrich is recognized in the United States. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. And interestingly, my research last summer uncovered an error in the Goodrich national nomination, which I've since reported. So this error is unfortunately repeated in many other secondary sources, other printed sources, and it's circled here where the nomination names William Story, wrong first name, and misspelled second name as the architect, and that will be corrected soon. Next slide, please. A really significant distinction with the Goodrich is the second entrance and upstairs theater, known by 1906 as the Pettis Memorial Hall, and apartments were added in 1961 that Jana will speak more about. And here you see the differentiation of the arches where one is granite and one is brick. Next slide, please. It's just extraordinary that the top half of the original stage of Pettis Memorial Hall still exists above the apartments. I've been climbing around Victorian buildings for about 30 years now, and honestly, I've never seen anything quite like this. Next slide, please. And that's another link, I think, to the Haskell, which has been, of course, fully restored and whose theater shows here. Next slide. So I mentioned this idea of the building's function as a memorial, and this is a question I've worked on in many other contexts. How does architecture remember? And I think in this case, the library remembers through its naming, which is a very hot topic today. And of course, the name Pettis Memorial, including the word memorial, was included over the library entrance and establishes this clear association with as a memorial. And there's quite a bit of correspondence about how the word memorial might be too big to fit in the space allotted. Oops, sorry. Next slide, Jana. Thank you. It's really significant that it is a woman donor remembering her husband and daughter. And here is the daughter, beautiful portrait, which and showing in situ in the library. Next slide, please. So George D. Story is an extraordinary example of cross-border fluidity in architectural practice at this time. He was born in Manchester, Massachusetts, but as I said, worked and lived in Stansted. And then after his first wife died in 1864, he married Canadian Celestia Rexford from Magog in 1867, adopting her children eventually. Next slide. That's the marriage record. And when he died in 1916 in Waterbury, Vermont, he was buried in Beebe. And you see the cemetery and the stone here. So even in death, he had a lot of cross-border mobility. And I think this fluidity in terms of architectural practice is really interesting, that he designed buildings in both countries at the same time. He designed the Pettis from Newport, but he sourced the materials from this side of the border, and the bids for the brick contracts were from both American and Canadian suppliers. Next slide, please. So we don't really know why he got the job, why George D. Story got the job, but it is clear that the donors were committed to him long before the contract was signed. Note that a Montreal architect with a pretty fancy downtown address, R.M. Roddy, shown here, tried to snag the project and was rejected a month prior to the signing of the contract. So this shows that the Pettises were already fully committed to Story. Next slide, please. So I'll finish here with two things that we need to know. And the main one is we need to know the location of 18 original architectural plans that have been missing for some time, like probably since the 80s, and are named in the specifications dated from 1893 with this detailed list of 18 drawings. And I'm intrigued by the mention of the reading room, conversation room, corridor, and sitting room. I could do so much more with this material if I had the drawings. And also, sadly, we have no archival interior photos of the library. So if anybody knows where any of those are, I'd be so grateful to hear from you. And then finally, my last slide is just to finish to say George D. Story is a man of mystery, because we have no idea what the D stands for. Even in his birth documents, it's not really clear. So lots more work to do. And I turn it back to Jana.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the operation of the library in the early years, and then moving on through. Since its opening in 1894, the library has run, I have a slide, I think. The library is run continually under a board of 7 trustees. In the early days, the librarians lived in an apartment that took up the back half of the main floor. We're not sure that was original, but it certainly was there through many years. And the library took up the front half of the main floor. The cellar held the furnace and coal storage, and the music hall took up the upstairs level. This document here is on this slide is a motion by the board of directors to accept and to thank for a memorial bequest of books, a library that was given to the Pettis. And it's signed by Austin Pettis. You can see down here. Austin Pettis was the son of Jeremiah, and the family continued to be involved with the operation of the library through the years. Mrs. Pettis had committed to pay for the librarian and the maintenance and operation of the library during her lifetime. And when she died in 1912, she left the sum of $15,000 to be invested at 5%, with an income of about $750 a year from that. And that was to cover library expenses. In 1894, it cost $200 a year to have a librarian. And by 1920, this had risen to $430. So costs crept up, and it became more difficult to cover all the expenses around the mid-1920s. The first appeal for funds was made to the Friends of the Library, and some fundraising initiatives were started. I have a next slide is a financial report from the year 1940. And I mean, there's so much, history and things one could talk about here, but it itemizes both expenses and costs, and things were still more or less on track. They certainly had a balance on hand at the end of the year. And the library, through all these years, the 50 years since its beginnings, was a going affair. There was a mobile library that moved books out to the rural schools where they could be borrowed by those living out in the country and for whom the long trek to Knowlton was just not easy. The schools also borrowed the books, presumably to teach their curriculum. And this next slide is the Librarians Report from 1941. And if you read it, it describes some of these activities. Things became more difficult in the 1940s through World War II and into the 50s. One example from a pamphlet on the history that we have here at the library is that the circulation in 1941 was about 10,000 books, a little over actually, and 10,000 books per year, and it fell to a low of 2,500 books by 1958. So that's like a 75% drop in circulation. And I quote from the pamphlet, "The library was then virtually bankrupt to the extent that about 450, which had been raised by a dedicated ladies committee to buy books, had to be spent on the coal bill." So things were tough. There's another report, Librarians Report from 1943. And it's just really neat to read into all this stuff and follow it. Something had to be done anyway to make the library financially secure, to inventory the collection and make sure the books held were such that the public wanted to read them or borrow them. And they also needed to make repairs to the deteriorating building. I mean, it was, 60 years old at that point. And to develop the library to serve the expanding area. It was growing. The next slide we just had to put in there. It's just for fun. This was a sign that was in the library around those years, and we don't have it up anymore, but it's here in my office. I think it's quite funny. It's not very big. So the first step was to convert the hall into 2 apartments that would bring much needed revenue to the library. This is an image of a pamphlet or a program for one of those lectures that would have been given upstairs in the hall. And you can see it was actually given by Jeremiah Pettis. The date is 1900. And this was the kind of thing that was happening in the hall. But with the advent of radio, gramophones, movies, and particularly the television in the post-war years, the hall was little used. And 2 apartments were built on the 2nd floor in 1961. This is a photo of that stairway. Now it's the left side entrance that you see on the facade. I think originally this little blip up here was not there. That's access to an attic that was kind of created once the apartments were put into the space. As you saw that photo of the top of the stage, that's up in that attic. So I think this was a big sweeping staircase that came to a landing that opened into the hall. And it's quite grand, but it is a steep staircase, I must say. The board felt justified to convert the hall into rentals because Mrs. Pettis had instructed that the reading room and lecture hall were accessories to the library to be used in connection with and for the purpose of promotion, always making the acquisition and maintenance of a library the leading object to be kept in view. The revenue from these apartments was a big boost to the operation revenue of the library, and that continues to today. We still rent those 2 apartments out. Various fundraising initiatives were also taken mid-century, such as dances and art sale and auction. Memorial donations were left to the library, and many people gave an annual donation. There were grants from the province and from the village. In 1963, those amounted to $831 from the province annually and $150 from the village. Then there was the building up of the French-speaking use of the library and of the collection. The French readership was increasing, and in 1963, 2 Francophone individuals were asked to join the book selection committee. More French books were purchased over the next decades, and in 1982, despite a larger circulation of English books, the book budget of $12,000 was divided evenly to $6,000 for each French and $6,000 for English books. And this model continues to the present. And this is just a photo from about 5-6 years ago from the children's area. And it just happens to be the French shelves there. So I put it here. I guess Splat was very popular right then. The next step was another move that was made was expansion into the basement. So in 1972, the coal cellar was converted to make usable library space for the growing collection. The dirt floor had to be poured with concrete and paneled walls erected to hide the stone foundation, as it remains today. As you can see, that's the basement, one of the a photo from one shot of the basement. A few years later, this was followed by roof repair and new windows. Through these years, the only paid person in the library was the librarian. Everyone else, from the board of trustees down to those on book selection committees, book repair, and general library work, were dedicated volunteers giving generously of their time. And another picture here. In the 1960s, Catherine Fraser was hired to run the library. We believe that's her on the left, and it's a portrait of her and her sister. She was a professional librarian who had managed the Children's Library in Westmount for many years. She remained in this position from 1967 to 1983 and continued to live in the apartment at the back of the library after her retirement. Under her management, the library had grown from a collection of books in one front room, a collection that was about 10,000 books in 1970, to a collection of roughly 25,000 books spread over 2 floors and with the new basement space. The low book circulation of the 1950s and 60s started to rise in 1965 and continued to grow steadily from about 5,000 books in 1965 to 22,000 in 1983. It is in that year, 1983, that the management of the library was taken by Susan Bailey Godin, who was trained as a library technician, and with such knowledge, library procedures and practices were brought up to date, culminating with the 1990 renovation of the main floor of the library, which consisted of integrating the back librarian's apartment into library space, reorganizing the work areas, modernizing the library shelving, new furniture, and the creation of an office, a circulation counter, and work area, as well as a modest meeting, workroom, lunchroom. Just so you can see on these photos, this is looking southeast corner. This is the little alcove that on the outside Anne-Marie had mentioned. And with the renovation, what it did was it opened this wall up, and shelving in the library moved towards the back of the building, because before that, this was the apartment that the librarian lived in. The movie My Side of the Mountain was showcased this space, this reading room. It was filmed in 1969. Many of you might know of it, and the space also displays a collection of material related to our local superstar mystery writer, Louise Penny. And she's an important supporter of our library. So we are very glad to have that as part of our library. Brings in lots of visitors and just makes everyone feel part of the community. In 2000, the library automated. This is a view of the circulation area and sort of the processing workspace. And with automation, that means that the card catalog was digitized and the library and the library management software, as well as the necessary computers, were purchased to manage the circulation and the collection. In 1994, the library celebrated its centennial, and a commemorative bronze plaque was installed in the front portico, which is a photo of it. So it was 100 years old in 1994. Susan Godin fell ill in 2003 and was not able to return to her job. I started here in 2004, and since then we have continued to modernize the library and moving away from some of the rigidity for which libraries were known, and ushering a more modern and up-to-date atmosphere. The late 2000s saw the transformation where the reference collection of encyclopedias and other specialized reference books became more or less obsolete with the emergence and development of the internet and Google. We also saw the popularity of ebooks and digital audiobooks and the emergence of lending platforms for these materials for libraries. Now we see the growth to digital magazines, newspapers, and movies and videos. And all such developments are moving quickly and require constant development of new knowledge and expertise. But make no mistake, paper books and magazines are still popular, and the circulation of which is around 32,000 a year. The realities of today are transforming libraries from hushed halls of reading to busy and bustling community hubs that play a fundamental role in society. where reading still takes place, but so do so many other things: learning, working, writing, meeting, making, developing, sharing, growing, all in a convivial atmosphere where people feel they belong. They offer resources and services that offer opportunities for learning and creating, a place to exchange ideas, support literacy, education, and self-actualization, and help shape new ideas and perspectives that are central to a creative and innovative society. They are the gateways to knowledge and culture. So the library needs space at the current time. Oh, I've jumped to that already. There has been a lack of space at the library for some years, with no dedicated room to hold any programming or such. And it was also clear that some of the spaces, particularly the basement, needed to be brought up to current standards. In 2018, the library board developed a strategic plan, and it became very clear that in order to fulfill the mission and goals set for the future, the library would need new spaces. This led to a pre-feasibility study in order to clarify the needs and the possibilities for expansion. And the firm Chevalier Morales Architects undertook this analysis, and I have some images from their report. This is one of them. So this is the lowest level, the garden level. The most feasible route, that's what the pre-feasibility study showed us, that the most feasible route was to build an addition on the garden level, and this will provide the new spaces. So just to orient you, this is the footprint of the original library, which is the basement, basically what we call the basement. There's a collection of books there now, but originally it had just been a dirt floor cellar. And this part here is a proposed addition. And what it would do is it would give us a multi-use room here, a media lab. There'd be public washrooms. There'd be sort of a self-serve cafe, an entrance area with a circulation desk, a specialized, area for young children to use the library and to be able to enjoy the space and not sit on a cold floor. And by the windows here, a reading area for whoever by the windows. And so this is the lowest level. And if we jump then to the main floor will have the same footprint. This is the original building, with a slight reconfiguration of the office processing rooms down here. This is where our current circulation desk is. The main entrance from, but the historic feel of the place, the main entrance from Knowlton Road and the reading room, which is here, will remain, with restoration of some elements to better choices, such as, for example, the fluorescent lighting that was installed sometime in the 1960s would be changed out and things like that. The new element to this main floor will be a terrace accessed at the back. This is a terrace overlooking Coldbrook Park and Mill Pond. And the last slide I have is a preliminary sketch of this idea. It is not a design yet, just a spatial concept. And what I like about it is that it does not overwhelm the historic library building, which remains visible from all sides. And what is hidden is the foundation level on the backside, which is the most unattractive bit and has some issues. So it will probably be have quite a bit of glass, and that glass will reflect the greenery around it. There'll be a possibility to be on top of the terrace. People who are walking around the library will be able to see what it's about. We'll have easier access to it, because currently the Victorian entrance is a little bit forbidding for some. A more porous communication with the community. And so we're kind of excited about it, and are just sort of in the middle of the process of making all of this come together. Since 2019, we have been putting together the funding for this project, and we have received funding and support from the town of Brome Lake and many, many generous, very generous donations, large and small, from the benefactors in this community. We're still waiting to hear from the provincial and federal governments about the grant applications that we made to them, because that's a crucial part of the funding for this project. And so I don't think I'll go into any more details about that, but there's information on our website, and you can follow us also on Facebook and Instagram and find out more. But that's where we're at, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that might come up. Where are we for time?
Well, that was fantastic, Anne-Marie and Jana. Thank you very much. It's a wonderful project to see on the screen, and I'm sure people will have questions. I'll just ask Glenn to come in again just to remind everyone how to, if you're not familiar with Zoom, it's okay. He'll just tell you where you can connect to our speakers.
Hi, everyone. As before, the chat box is your best friend. So if you have a question you'd like to ask, you can either just say in the chat box, I have a question, and then we'll queue you up and we'll turn on your mic, and you can turn on your video and you can ask yourself, or you can also just type your question into the chat box and we'll ask it on your behalf. For our viewers on Facebook, I will do my best to check in over there to see if there are any questions, and I'll relay them on your behalf to our two speakers today. Just a reminder that this event is being recorded and broadcast simultaneously. So this is the part of the talk where, the video is more likely to go to you intentionally or accidentally. So if you're not comfortable with that, you can leave the call and just check us out on Facebook. It's happening live. Otherwise, you're more than welcome to stay on the call. Just know that this is being recorded and broadcast. So I'll pass it back to Heather.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I'll kick it off with a question, and I'm going to go way back to the beginning of your slides. You said something that really intrigued me. You said something about the women in the library movement, and so I was wondering, were women in the 19th century a major force in the development of libraries? Like Narcissa was, obviously, because maybe through her husband and her brother-in-law, but I wondered if women in general were part of this library movement in 19th century Quebec and Canada in general.
So I can't answer with any lots of research behind me, because I haven't really delved into it per se. I just know, though, that I think one of the things that makes the Pettis unique is the story. It's the story of this woman who saw to it and wanted it done. I think her model for a lot of, it's mentioned in her obituary that she'd gone to the US a lot to kind of look at what she could do. It speaks also to the porousness of the border that Anne-Marie mentioned, where there was a lot of movement into the US and such. And in the United States, there were the Carnegie Libraries that were being funded by the Carnegie Foundation. And they were a slightly different model, though. They would help fund a library if a community really wanted one, and there had to be sort of a community movement and support from the municipal, government, whatever it was called at that time, and they would help fund it. And I think she knew of that, and she was looking at that. But this is slightly different, because she really had it built herself, her input, and then presented it as a gift to everyone, to the community, open to everyone, to be free and accessible to all. So, I mean, women have always been involved in libraries because many librarians, the professionists tended to be women, but not always. And I mean, like I said, I haven't really done research on this, so I don't think I want to go further with that. Thanks.
No, that's great. Thank you. Yeah.
I see Matthew Farfan has a question, and he used the raise hand feature on the reaction pane. So you can use that too. If you see that button that says reactions, you can raise your hand. So Matthew, I'm going to turn on your mic. Hey, Matthew.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, it was very interesting to hear the connection between the library and, I guess, the performance venue upstairs. Having spent many years on the board of the Haskell Library and Opera House, including up on the catwalk and in the attic, I was very interested to see the remaining bit of this, the arch over the stage at the Pettis Library. That I found that fascinating, especially the artwork. I was just curious, do you have much information about the types of performances that went on there? I wasn't aware of it.
There's some material in the archives here at the Brome County Historical Society. There were lectures, there was music, there was, I read somewhere that schools used it for maybe a performance that they were doing, and it was offered to them. I think that example that I showed of the program or pamphlet that was showing one of these events, it was, I think, a lecture on Canada. Confederation was in 1867, and so, you know, those 30 years it was a new country. And when I mentioned Mrs. Pettis going to Ottawa, so her husband was elected as a member of parliament in the early 1870s, so we're talking like 6-7 years after Confederation, and they were off to, you know, to Ottawa to join in that parliament. So I don't have much more than that. I do know that the hall simply was not being used. And we considered, like, it's quite a gem, because what they did was, it was a high ceiling. I didn't show, I have other elevations that show, you know, the height of things, but it was a high ceilinged hall with windows on both sides, and it had a wooden slatted ceiling on a bit of an arc, and they just put the apartments, regular sort of 8-foot high apartments, into that space. And so we have this 7 extra feet up there of this sort of mid attic. There's another, you know, the rafters are above that. And we obviously looked at taking that back for the library, but there are a few issues. One is just as library space, there's the issue of running a small building on 3 levels. The other problem was that we would not be able to, with modern building codes, use that space without underpinning the entire foundation and building. So the cost is as much as adding to the back. And lastly, we would lose the revenue from those apartments. And finally, it's not out of the question to never do that. Maybe one day we'll be in a position where it could be done, but it would be with a different, it would have a different spirit of why we'd be doing it. It wouldn't be sort of to increase the needs of the library operation, but to kind of restore and bring heritage back. So I shall see.
Can I just add that there is quite a bit of information in the archives on the chairs. There's a lot of discussion whether it should be fixed seating or what kind of seating it should be. So, you know, it's super interesting. And we have a pretty good record of the lecture topics, which are all about, you know, improvement.
Somebody was asking if it was, I think, common for a woman to be behind the vision. It's interesting, again, that connection with the Haskell. Martha Haskell was the one whose vision it was to set up the library and opera house. And I guess very similar to the Pettis Library 10 years earlier, the library was to be supported by the activities that went on upstairs. That was set out in the charter. Very interesting. Thank you.
I see we have a question from Laura. Laura, I'm going to unmute you. Hi, Laura.
Hi. How are you?
Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
I just had actually a couple of quick questions. As you know, I've been doing a little bit of research on the library, and I was reading about the Davies Gift.
Yes.
And I wondered, is there still mention of that in the library? Is it still called like the Davies Room or anything? I couldn't remember.
No, not really.
Okay.
And it was a donation of a library.
Yeah, it was all the
of
books.
all the books
Yeah.
at the very early years. I've come across it. I don't have all of it's not at the tip of my fingers, but yes, it was an important growth to the size of the collection. I mean, this library started, I think, with like 100 books. That was the collection, and hence it was like on a shelf, right?
Yeah.
And so that was a big deal, and it was right at the, if I'm not mistaken, I think they mentioned the Davies Gift at the opening. So it was part of it starting up, but I don't know much more than that. And we don't have a name.
I just couldn't remember if it was anywhere in the building. So and my other question was, the first librarian was a Mr. Cleveland.
Yes, I saw that.
Do we know anything about that person?
I don't know, but there could possibly be more research done. One of the challenges today was to try and somehow make this story like span the years and fit into the times, because almost every paragraph you could do, tons of levels.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Laura, but it would be something to take this kind of information and maybe see what could be dug up at the archives here.
Great.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
I'm just curious, like everything is so interesting to me
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I there's a list at the back of the pamphlet of all the librarians through the years, and that runs through that. And some of them only held the post, for like a year or two. There was a lot of change.
Yes, he did. Oh, I see Deirdre Crandall is saying Baxter Cleveland. I couldn't find his first name, so there you go.
There you go. That's a great resource.
Thank
yes.
you, Deirdre. She knows what she's talking about.
Oh, yes. That's somebody to talk to.
Jana, I have a couple of questions about going back up into the attic space. Any plans to restore the artwork up there, repurpose it into the library, the new library edition? Some way to save what is up there?
Well, not per se, but nothing's going to damage it. Like, we're not going to forget about it. We're pretty tickled by having, well, I mean, everybody knew it was there, but I take a lot of people up there to see it. So it's going to stay like that. Now, the thing is, if we take it down or something, then it kind of takes it out of its place. And I think there's some secret hope, whether it's realistic or not, that one day it could be, actualized in some way, but I'm not sure how, and I'm not sure it's into this new space right now.
Has it been photographed at least?
Yeah. And I mean, we could do something, we could somehow do more research and try and come up with more of a story for it, what it was, and to let people know it's there. And maybe one day that will bring about some kind of a situation where the institution finds itself in a position where its funding is such that it could look at restoration. But it's kind of a different project than expanding a working library. It's more of the restoration of history. And I mean, the reason we're not going up there is because, like I mentioned, the costs of making that space sort of legally public would require lots of engineering on the building, just because you have to move with the current building codes. And so what would we use it for? To put a lot of people in there, or books, right? So either one of those, it's the carrying weight of that floor.
True.
So I don't know.
It's what the decision was at the time,
But we seriously looked at all the options in that pre-feasibility study and the pros and cons. And on first sight, it seems like a no-brainer to take that back, but it's more complicated as often it is. Yeah.
Another question maybe for Anne-Marie too is that they seem to be on arch, a window over the second arch that's bricked in. Was that original?
Yes, that's the brick pattern in the second floor, just repeats the motifs of the entrances.
Okay.
So it's not a false brick.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's very fancy.
Yeah. Another one from Beverly. Do you have any photos of Badger School? I was in grade 1 there. My teacher was Ruth Bockwood. I lived on Bolton Pass Road. a haunted house?
I don't hear, but again, the Brome County Historical Society here in town, it's it's like our sister institution in a way. They hold the archives, and we've sent our minute books and our archives of this library up to them as well. So it would be to contact them for those specifics.
Here's just a very simple one. How can you become a member of the Pettis Library? And is there any way that they can make a donation to what is going on in your project?
Oh, of course, absolutely. So to become a member, it's open to anyone. Membership, if you're not a resident of the town of Brome Lake, there's an annual fee. So it's still at $30 a year for an individual. So not too expensive. And it requires just to sign up, and we need the proof of identity basically, and then you get a card, and it'll give you, if you're far away, you can use the digital resources, but if you're somewhere in the area that you could come, then you're welcome to come and borrow books. And yes, the project, absolutely, that's what we're fundraising now. We've had a year of both a silent campaign and a public campaign, and we're getting up. We haven't reached our goal yet for the capital campaign, but we're getting there, and any contribution is most helpful, because as you may all know, with COVID, if anything, prices are shooting up, and it's a big undertaking here for us. The information's on our website. That might be the easiest way, or you're welcome to give us a call. The library number, I can share it on the chat, or I can say it out. Facebook, Instagram, we're there everywhere. We also have we're signed up with Canada Helps, so we can take donations on the website electronically. We accept checks. Our address is at the website, so that would be wonderful.
Oh, very good.
I see a note from Anne Marie. She's saying, I'm the archivist right now at the museum and would be glad if someone wants to do research in the library's archive. So I know there are a few people interested in that. There's an interesting comment just above that from Hillary. She's saying that her parents borrowed from Pettis and Haskell over the years, but also had no idea about this theater space above. She mentioned that the Quebec Literary and Historical Society in Quebec City was very active in Pettis' early days. Of course, I think we kind of know them more as the Morin Center maybe today, but did they ever do presentations there? And my own spin on that would be, I noticed certain resonances with the Atwater Library here in Montreal, starting as a mechanics institute, and these very much like this moral foundation of self-betterment and, educating ourselves and giving free lectures and that. And I'm wondering if there was a synergy between these sorts of institutions.
Well, possibly. So I just have to tell you, I worked at the Atwater Library for 12 years before I worked here. So I'm very well familiar with Atwater and the Mechanics Institute. The Morin Center. So what's interesting about the Pettis is that it was very early. So the Morin Center in Quebec City was earlier. And I think the Westmount Library in Westmount Montreal was also just a year or two earlier, but in a rural setting or in a village setting like this, we're the first sort of public library. And what I wanted to say, we don't, there's this weird absence of photographic documentation of what was going on here in those early years. We can't quite figure out why we can't find photos. Even the two photos of the village I had, the library's just, not quite there. It's strange. So I don't have a lot of information on that collaboration potentially of the Morin Center, or maybe sending lectures. I have not come across anything like that. And maybe the Morin Center has information. Maybe we'd pop up in other archives around. So, but definitely the idea of self-betterment and of having access to information without censorship, sort of without to be able to read and to learn and to grow. That's the idea that existed and still does. It's
I see that Anne-Marie has put a call out to anyone that has interior photos from any era or has
Yes.
seen the 18 original missing drawings to contact you. And we'll try and get that word out there because they could be in someone's attic and hopefully they haven't been thrown out and someone just doesn't realize what treasure they have. So that's to be hoped.
It would be wonderful. And like Anne-Marie mentioned, it would be so amazing to track down the blueprints. It's just, I think that maybe they went out when some of the projects were being done on the building, they went out to contractors. I'm just guessing, and maybe just, didn't come back because they were passé sort of. But now from a historical standpoint, oh my gosh, we'd love to have them.
Mr. Story maybe took them back to Vermont or who knows, eh?
Yeah, we don't know. But there's we're lacking some sort of visuals, that you would think would exist. That there's a dearth of that.
Well, you move on regardless.
Yes.
And what a wonderful library you have in Knowlton. I've had the pleasure of having a guided tour a few years ago, and it's a marvelous space. So I assume a lot of people that are on Zoom today and in Facebook Live have knowledge of the library, but if you haven't, it's really worth a trip into Knowlton, which is a beautiful village anyway, and to stop at the library. And it's wonderful to hear the great news that there's new vision for the space and into the 21st century. I'm sure Narcissa would be delighted. I mean, probably blown away by the technology and all the rest, but
absolutely, it's a feeling like it's necessary to make that move to go forward. Otherwise, we'll become maybe more just of a little lending library, and it might start to drop off. I think the future calls for this kind of a move, and we need space for programming to host kids in a more comfortable and a more up-to-date kind of environment to be able to fulfill our mandate. Really, we feel it more and more.
Yeah, and the libraries are so dynamic now, and
they are. It's part of, and so to house that all, and also, I mean, just in the town of Brome Lake here, the project for the center of town and the Coldbrook Park, it's like right next door to us, and so that's been a project that the town has had, the municipal, government, whatever. And it just dovetails with what we want to do, and it would make such a wonderful, unique center here in the village, and so we're very excited, and we're all working hard with lots of volunteers. I mean, our board are all volunteers and working so hard, and everyone else who's involved. I can't even begin with name the list. Well,
you can tell that both you and Anne-Marie have a love for this building and all it stands for. And so I'd like to thank you very much for presenting the history of the Pettis Library to us today and its incredible future. I think that you are on the right track as someone who's just observing and learning about the library, and it's so marvelous. And I thank you very much for being with us today. We're going to bring the program to a close. So I'd like to thank everyone who joined our Heritage Talks online presentation, and I hope you'll be able to join us for our next one called the Chateau Ramsay, an historic site and museum powered by volunteers by Bruno Paul Stenson, this coming Thursday, February 17th at 7 o'clock at night. And if you're wondering how to attract volunteers into your organization, it doesn't have to be a museum. This is a wonderful program that they have going on at the Chateau Ramsay. It's completely volunteer driven. It's very dynamic, very interesting. So if you want to know how to build a volunteer program, that's the show that you'll want to see for sure. So you can tell the friends that you know that work in heritage organizations or community groups to tune in on Thursday at 7 o'clock right here on Facebook Live, or join us by Zoom. And all that information is on our Facebook page. And you can join by Zoom if you'd like. The links are all there. So thanks very much again, Anne-Marie and Jana, for a fabulous presentation. And we'll see you next time on Heritage Talks Online. Bye. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.